At night, the house is very quiet now. Too quiet. There's no breathing beside me, no turning over, no familiar weight on the mattress. I was married for 52 years. 52. People used to call us the perfect couple. I believed them. I believed it until my husband died, because it was only after he was gone, lying alone in the same bed we shared for half a century, that I finally understood the truth. My perfect marriage was a lie. How can a marriage last 52 years and still be broken? How can two people grow old together yet never truly meet? What did we do wrong when everyone said we were doing everything right? And what if the advice we trusted most was quietly tearing us apart? Stay with me, because this story isn't about blame. It's about the truth no one tells you until it's too late. A truth that cost me decades of genuine connection. A truth that left me sleeping alone long before my husband's side of the bed went permanently cold. My name is Margaret, and I met Richard when I was 23 years old. It was 1968, and the world felt like it was changing faster than anyone could keep up with. But Richard was steady, reliable, the kind of man my mother said would make a good husband. He worked at an insurance company. He wore suits that were always pressed. He opened doors and pulled out chairs, and never raised his voice in public. When he proposed 6 months after we met, I said yes without hesitation. I believed in love that lasted forever. Richard believed in responsibility. Between us, we thought we could build something that would stand the test of time. Our wedding was small but beautiful. My sister cried during the vows. Richard's father gave a speech about commitment and perseverance. And somewhere during the reception, Richard's aunt pulled me aside, her hand warm on my shoulder, and she said something I would carry with me for the next 5 decades. Never go to bed angry, dear. That's the secret to a lasting marriage. It sounded wise, mature, grown up, so we made it sacred. We made it our rule, our North Star, the foundation upon which we would build our perfect life together. And for a while, it seemed to work. We moved into a small 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. Richard got promoted. I got pregnant with our first child, a daughter we named Sarah. Then came Michael 2 years later, and finally Emily 3 years after that. Our home filled with the sounds of childhood, laughter, arguments over toys, the television playing cartoons on Saturday mornings, report cards stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, Little League games and piano recitals and parent-teacher conferences. To the outside world, we were stable, dependable, perfect. People would see us at church on Sundays, all 5 of us dressed in our best clothes, sitting in the 3rd pew from the front, and they would smile. They would nod. They would say things like, "You two are so lucky," or "I hope my marriage turns out like yours," and I would smile back, my hand resting lightly on Richard's arm, and I would believe them. I would believe that what we had was exactly what marriage was supposed to be. But inside our home, behind the carefully maintained lawn and the cheerful Christmas lights we put up every December, something quieter was happening, something I didn't have the language to name. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The fights started small. They always do, don't they? Richard thought I spent too much money on groceries. I thought he spent too much time at the office. He didn't like how I disciplined the children. I didn't like how he never helped with bedtime. He thought I was too emotional. I thought he was too cold. These weren't screaming matches. We didn't throw things or slam doors. We were too civilized for that, too controlled. Instead, our arguments were quiet, tense, full of carefully chosen words, designed to wound, without being loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I remember one night in particular. It was late autumn, maybe 1979 or 1980. The leaves were falling outside, and I could hear them scraping against the driveway in the wind. Richard had come home 2 hours late from work, without calling. Dinner was cold. The kids were already in bed, and when I asked him why he hadn't let me know, he said he forgot. Just forgot. Like I was something that could slip his mind. Like the dinner I'd spent an hour preparing didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Anger, yes, but also something deeper. Loneliness. The kind that makes you feel like you're standing in a crowded room screaming and no one can hear you. I wanted to tell him that. I wanted to say, "Richard, I feel invisible. I feel like I'm disappearing and you don't even notice." But I didn't. Instead, I said, "You could have called." And he said, "You're right. I'm sorry." And that was it. That was the entire conversation. Because we had a rule. Never go to bed angry. So we couldn't let the fight linger. We couldn't sit with the discomfort. We couldn't do the hard, messy work of actually resolving anything. We just had to make it to bedtime without being mad, or at least without appearing to be mad. So that night, like so many nights before and after, we brushed our teeth side by side in the bathroom. We climbed into bed, we turned off the lights, and then, in the darkness, one of us would remember the rule. Usually it was me. I would reach across the space between us and touch his shoulder. I would say, "I love you," and he would say, "I love you too," and we would both roll over, facing away from each other, and pretend that was enough. Pretend that saying the words meant we'd done the work. But the anger didn't go away. It just went underground. It burrowed into my chest and made a home there. And every time we had this same exchange, every time we spoke those hollow words in the dark, the anger grew a little bit stronger. I started staying awake longer than Richard. I would lie there in the quiet, building arguments in my head, rehearsing all the things I should have said, all the ways I could have made him understand. Sometimes I would cry silently into my pillow, careful not to wake him. Other times, I would just stare at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on me like a physical thing. I thought I was the only one doing this. I thought Richard just fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow, unburdened by the same thoughts that kept me awake. But I was wrong about that too. One night, maybe 15 years into our marriage, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was suffocating me. So I broke it. I turned toward him in the dark, and I said, "Do you just fall asleep after we fight? Does it not bother you?" There was a long pause. So long I thought maybe he actually was asleep. But then he spoke. His voice was quiet, tired. "No," he said. "I lie here thinking too." That's when I realized we were both alone together. Both of us lying in the same bed, inches apart, carrying the same heaviness. But neither of us willing to reach across the distance and actually connect. Because that would mean breaking the rule. That would mean going to bed angry. And we'd been told that was the one thing we absolutely could not do. The years continued like this. The children grew up. Sarah went to college, then Michael, then Emily. The house got quieter. The arguments got quieter too. Not because we'd learned to communicate better, but because we'd learned to communicate less. We became experts at avoiding conflict, at sidestepping difficult conversations. I get that. At maintaining a surface-level peace that required nothing from either of us except silence. I watched other couples our age. I saw them fight in grocery store parking lots. I saw them laugh loudly at restaurants. I saw them hold hands during walks and kiss in public and argue passionately, and make up just as passionately. And I felt something like envy, because at least they were alive. At least they were feeling something. Richard and I were proud of being calm, proud of being controlled, proud of never making a scene. We didn't know calm can be cold. We didn't know control can be a cage. By the time we reached our 50th wedding anniversary, our children threw us a party. They rented a small hall. They invited friends and neighbors and family members. They put together a slideshow of photos from throughout our marriage. Pictures of us young and smiling. Pictures of us with babies. Pictures of us at graduations and weddings and holidays. Everyone kept saying the same thing. 50 years. That's incredible. That's so rare these days. You two must really love each other. And I would smile. Richard would smile. We would stand side by side, his hand on my back, and we would accept their congratulations like we'd earned some kind of prize. But standing there, surrounded by people celebrating our longevity, all I could think was how little they actually knew. How little we actually knew each other. That night, after everyone had gone home and we were alone in our living room taking off our party clothes, Richard looked at me and said, "That was nice, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yes, very nice." And that was the extent of our conversation about 50 years of marriage. Nice, like it was a pleasant dinner we'd attended, not a half-century of shared life, not the raising of 3 children, not the thousands of nights we'd spent in the same bed. Just nice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him and say, "Is this really all we are? Is this really all we've become?" But I didn't, because we'd spent 50 years learning how not to say what we really felt. And some habits are too deeply ingrained to break. The next 2 years passed quietly. Richard retired from his job. I kept busy with gardening and book club and volunteering at the library. We ate dinner together most nights, making small talk about the weather or what we'd watched on television. We slept in the same bed, our bodies familiar but distant. We said, "I love you" when the situation seemed to call for it. Anniversaries. birthdays, before hanging up the phone. It became a reflex, automatic, meaningless. I don't think either of us noticed how hollow it had become. Or maybe we did notice, but we were too tired to do anything about it, too comfortable in our dysfunction to imagine anything different. Then, one night, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in March, we went to bed just like we always did. Richard read his book for 20 minutes. I did the crossword puzzle. We turned off the lights. We said, "Good night. I love you. I love you too." We rolled onto our sides. And sometime in those dark hours between midnight and dawn, Richard's heart stopped beating. Just like that. No warning. No dramatic goodbye. No final words of wisdom or declarations of love. He went to sleep next to me, and he never woke up. I found him in the morning when I rolled over to get up. His body was already cold, his face peaceful, like he was still sleeping. And my first thought, the very first thing that went through my mind, was that the last thing we'd said to each other was "I love you." I remember thinking that should bring me comfort, that it was somehow poetic, or meaningful, or right, but it didn't. It felt empty, because I knew the truth. I knew those words had stopped meaning anything real a long time ago. The funeral was well attended. Richard had been a respected man in our community. People told stories about his reliability, his work ethic, his quiet strength. They told me how lucky I was to have had him for so long. They said things like, "At least you had 52 wonderful years together," and "What a blessing to have loved someone so deeply for so long." I nodded. I thanked them. I accepted casseroles and flowers and sympathy cards. And then they all went home. And I was alone. Truly alone for the first time in 52 years. The house felt different immediately. Not just quieter, but emptier in a way I hadn't expected. I kept waiting for him to come home, to hear his car in the driveway, to see him sitting in his chair reading the newspaper, but he never did. And slowly, as the days turned into weeks, something started to happen, something I didn't anticipate. The grief I expected to feel, the overwhelming sadness everyone kept preparing me for, it didn't come. Not in the way it should have. Instead, what I felt was something much more complicated, much more painful. I felt relief and shame for feeling relieved. And anger. So much anger. Not at Richard for dying, but at both of us for how we'd lived. I started sleeping in the middle of the bed, something I'd never done in 52 years of marriage. And one night, lying there in the darkness, I realized something that made my entire body go cold. It felt exactly the same as it had when Richard was alive. The loneliness, the silence, the sense of being utterly alone in my own life. Nothing had changed. He was gone. But the feeling of emptiness that had lived in my chest for decades was exactly the same. That's when I finally understood. That's when the lie I'd been living cracked open, and I could see it clearly for the first time. We didn't have a perfect marriage. We had a functional one. We followed rules instead of facing truth. We said the words instead of doing the work. Never go to bed angry had sounded like wisdom, but it had actually been permission. Permission to avoid, to suppress, to pretend, because anger isn't the enemy of love. Silence is. Resentment is. Distance is. We should have gone to bed angry. We should have stayed up all night fighting if that's what it took to actually hear each other, to actually connect, to actually be honest about what we were feeling. Instead, we learned to perform love while never actually practicing it. I started going through our things, his clothes, his papers, his side of the closet, and I found a journal he'd kept. I hadn't known he kept a journal. In 52 years of marriage, I'd never known this about him. I sat on the bedroom floor, and I read it. Page after page of his thoughts, his frustrations, his loneliness. And it was all there. Everything I'd felt, he'd felt too. The distance, the longing for something deeper, the fear that we were wasting our lives maintaining an image instead of building something real. He'd written about fights we'd had, about things he'd wanted to say but didn't, about lying awake at night feeling alone, about wondering if this was all there was. My husband, the man I'd shared a home with for over half my life, had been carrying the same pain I was, and neither of us had ever said it out loud. We'd been drowning right next to each other, too proud, or too scared, or too committed to our perfect image to reach out and save each other. I spent months after Richard's death doing something I should have done decades earlier. I started being honest with myself, with our children. I told Sarah one afternoon over coffee that her father and I had not had the perfect marriage everyone thought we did. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I know, Mom." We all knew. That stunned me. Our children, the ones we thought we were setting such a good example for, had seen through us the entire time. They'd grown up watching two people be polite to each other instead of real with each other. And it had affected them. Sarah told me she'd struggled in her own marriage because she didn't know what healthy conflict looked like, because she'd never seen her parents actually work through anything. She'd only seen us avoid and perform and pretend. Michael told me something similar. He said he'd always felt like he had to keep his emotions in check around us, like expressing anger or frustration or sadness was somehow wrong or inappropriate, because that's what we'd modeled. Control, restraint, never making a scene, never going to bed angry. Emily, the youngest, told me she'd actually been relieved when she went to college and saw her roommate's parents fight during move-in day. They yelled at each other in the parking lot, she said, and then they hugged and laughed and worked it out. I'd never seen anything like that. I didn't know people could be mad at each other and still love each other. You and Dad never fought, so I thought any conflict meant the relationship was broken. Our children had spent their entire lives learning the wrong lessons from us, learning that love means never disagreeing, that connection means never being vulnerable, that a good marriage is a quiet one. I joined a grief support group at the community center. I thought it would be about missing Richard, about learning to live without him. And, in some ways it was, but what I found there was something unexpected. I found other widows and widowers who were going through the same realization I was. People who'd lost their spouses and discovered that what they were grieving wasn't just the person, but the relationship they'd never actually had, the connection they'd always wanted but never built. There was a man named Tom whose wife had died after 47 years of marriage. He told us he felt guilty because he wasn't as sad as he thought he should be. We were married for almost 50 years, he said, but I don't think we ever really knew each other. We lived side by side. We raised kids and paid bills and took vacations, but we never really talked, not about anything that mattered. And everyone in that circle nodded, because we understood. We'd all done it. We'd all mistaken longevity for success, routine for intimacy, silence for peace. I started seeing a therapist. At 75 years old, I sat in a stranger's office and talked about my marriage for the first time with complete honesty, and she asked me a question that I couldn't stop thinking about. She said, "Margaret, if you could go back and talk to your younger self on your wedding day, what would you tell her?" I thought about it for a long time, and finally I said, I'd tell her that love isn't about following rules, it's about breaking them when you need to. I'd tell her that going to bed angry isn't the worst thing that can happen in a marriage. Going to bed dishonest is. I'd tell her that conflict isn't the enemy, avoidance is. I'd tell her to fight, to cry, to be messy and real and vulnerable. I'd tell her that perfection is a performance, not a partnership. And I'd tell her that 52 years of politeness is worth less than 5 minutes of genuine connection. I've been widowed for 3 years now. I still sleep in the middle of the bed. I still eat dinner alone most nights. I still wake up sometimes and forget just for a moment that Richard is gone. But I've learned something in these 3 years that I didn't learn in 52 years of marriage. Love isn't proven by longevity. It's proven by vulnerability, by honesty, by the willingness to be uncomfortable in pursuit of something real. Never go to bed angry sounds like good advice. It sounds like wisdom, but it's not. Not the way we practiced it, because we used it as a weapon against intimacy. We used it as an excuse to never sit with our discomfort, to never push through the hard parts, to never actually resolve anything. We just buried it, over and over again, until we built a marriage on a foundation of things we'd never said. The advice should have been, never go to bed dishonest. Never go to bed with words stuck in your throat. Never go to bed pretending you're okay when you're not. Never go to bed performing love instead of practicing it. If that means staying up until 3 a.m. fighting, then fight. If that means crying and being messy and saying things you're scared to say, then say them. Because the alternative, the thing Richard and I did for 52 years, is so much worse. The alternative is waking up one day and realizing you've spent your entire life sleeping next to a stranger. A kind stranger. A familiar stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. I look at young couples now and I want to grab them by the shoulders and tell them all of this. I want to say, don't do what we did. Don't follow the rules you've been given without questioning them. Don't mistake peace for connection. Don't let comfort become complacency. Don't wait until one of you is dead to finally be honest about how you feel. But I also know they probably wouldn't listen. Because I wouldn't have listened either. Because some lessons can only be learned through living them. Through making the mistakes and carrying the regrets and lying awake at night wishing you'd done it differently. If I could have one more night with Richard, I wouldn't want to say I love you. We said that 1,000 times. It meant nothing by the end. What I would want to say is, I'm hurt. I'm scared. I feel alone. I need you to really see me. Not the version of me that's easy and convenient and quiet, but the real me, the messy one, the angry one, the one who needs more than you've been giving. I would want to have the fight we should have had on that autumn night in 1979, and the 100 other fights we should have had before and after. I would want to be real with him. Just once. Before it was too late. I sleep alone now, and it feels exactly the same as most of my marriage did. That's how I know the truth. That's how I know we got it wrong. If you're married right now, if you're in a relationship, I want you to ask yourself something tonight. Are you connected, or are you just coexisting? Are you building something real, or are you performing something safe? Are you saying I love you because you mean it, or because you're supposed to? And if the answer scares you, good. Let it scare you. Let it wake you up, because there's still time. That's the one thing I don't have anymore. Time. But you do, so use it. Have the hard conversations. Break the rules that aren't serving you. Go to bed angry if that's what it takes to finally be honest. Don't waste decades learning to be polite to each other, when you could be learning to actually love each other. What would you do differently if you could? What conversations are you avoiding right now? What words are stuck in your throat? Share your thoughts below. Tell me I'm not the only one who learned this lesson too late. And subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that don't just entertain, but stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Stories that make you think, that make you feel, that make you want to do better while you still can. Because our next story will make you question everything you thought you knew about love. But this story, I hope it makes you pick up the phone, or turn to the person next to you, or have the conversation you've been putting off. Before it's too late. Before you're lying alone in the dark, just like I am, wishing you'd been brave enough to be real when it mattered. Thank you for watching. And please, don't make the same mistake I did.